We are a big fan of keeping things simple, because simplicity and reliability often go hand in hand. But we're also a big fan of not spending too much money on diesel. So we have to use our available energy and our available heat wisely. However, the more efficiency you try to squeeze out of your system, often the more complicated it gets. So we're looking for a balance. My name is Gijs, and this is my dad. And this is Schoener Tijgerhaai. 2.5 years ago we started a major rebuild and we're sharing the process with you. Subscribe to stay tuned. In previous videos we already installed our fresh water boiler and laid floor heating in the wheelhouse and in the saloon. What is still missing is an actual heat source. In other words, calling it a boiler isn't really right. It doesn't boil anything. It can't even heat anything up on its own. It's just a buffer tank waiting for heat to be supplied. For starters, we want to use engine heat to warm up the potable water and the floor heating, which is not uncommon. You can do this with separate heat exchangers, but to save space and keep things simple, we chose a buffer tank with 2 internal heat exchanger coils, through one of which we plan to have warm engine coolant flow before it goes to the bilge keel coolers. That way, the engine coolant can heat up the potable water to a maximum of 80 degrees Celsius. The other coil we'll use for the heated floors, but more on that later. To use the engine coolant, we do need to make some adjustments to our piping, starting with the large generator. The hotline needs 2 branches, one towards and one return from the buffer tank. To make sure the water actually flows through the heat exchanger coil, we're installing a gate valve between the 2 branches. The gate valve allows us to throttle a bit in how much coolant goes to the buffer tank and how much goes straight to the keel coolers. And we can of course bypass the heating system completely. For maintenance, I'm installing isolation valves right after the branches. The connection for the internal heat exchanger coil is on the aft side of the buffer tank. So we had to gather all our used but still good 1-inch piping in order to make it all the way there and back. We also want to branch off the main engine coolant. Here we only need 1 pipe from the engine to the buffer tank, and the coolant will flow to the keel coolers through the same return pipe from the generator. So I started the fight of getting the big pipe out, and I lost. To keep the mess to a minimum, I'm using a manual pipe cutter instead of an angle grinder. I had to cut the pipe anyways to install the throttle valve here as well. In this line it's more important, because not all the main engine's coolant can flow through the coil in the buffer tank. With the valve, we can allow a certain amount to flow straight to the keel coolers. The branch on the top half of the pipe has to be tack welded on location and can be finished outside. After installing everything back, I opened all the valves to fill up the system and tried to let gravity push all the air out of the coil. The problem with a horizontal heat exchanger coil is that there is an air pocket in every loop, and getting those air pockets flushed through takes quite some force, more than just gravity. So I got out the air driven pump and flushed the coil a couple of times to make sure that all the air was out. Of course, all those freshly reused pipes need some paint. And the rest of the engine room should get some as well. The heated floors are on a separate loop. We cannot heat them with potable water straight from the tank, of course. And they only need water of 35 degrees Celsius. To extract that out of the buffer tank, the floor heating pump has two suction lines. One hot suction from the coil in the buffer tank and a cold one out of the return from the floors, which bypasses the buffer tank completely. By mixing them using a thermostatic valve, we get the desired 35 degrees Celsius. In real life, it looks a bit different than on the drawing. And I didn't draw all the valves and bypasses and stuff just to keep it clear. Of course, we're not always producing hot engine coolant. For a backup, we are installing an old Webasto diesel-fired coolant heater. This one came out of another boat, or a school bus, or an army truck. We're not sure, but it has been completely overhauled, so it's ready for another round. The original wiring is a bit complicated though. Fortunately, Webasto has a big online database for manuals of all their old models. And after studying the wiring diagram for a while, I think I can get rid of a couple of wires and it should still work. It used to have a programmable 7-day timer to determine when it should start preheating the school bus engine on every day of the week. But we just want our buffer tank to be hot, so all that wiring can be replaced by a thermostatic on-off switch on the buffer tank. We're connecting the burner on the same loop as the heated floors. The floor heating pump will then just take the hot water it needs from the hot line and the rest will go through the heat exchanger coil and heat up the buffer tank. When the buffer tank is hot, the Webasto will shut off. To prevent it from just pumping hot water around, there is a one-way valve in the bypass line. Normally these diesel burners have a little header tank for static pressure on the suction side of the pump. But we're installing an expansion vessel which we can fill to a higher pressure, because we don't have that much height available. This being a diesel burner, it needs an exhaust of course. And since we're planning to get rid of the small generator, we can just use its exhaust pipe and diesel supply line for the Webasto. The pipe does need some small adjustment. This diesel heater, probably being from a truck or a school bus, has its fume exhaust on the bottom. So we have to create a 100-degree bend to go straight up, made from some pieces of stainless steel from the scrapyard, with a drain for condensation on the bottom. The Webasto has rubber vibration dampers, so the exhaust pipe also needs to be able to vibrate a bit. That's where the stainless steel expansion piece comes in. These heaters don't really like to run on normal water. They are protected against rust and limescale by using glycol coolant. Since this liquid will also run through the heated floors, we chose propylene glycol, which is not poisonous and often used in heated floors and cooling systems, opposed to the poisonous ethylene glycol, which is the coolant that we use for our engines. To keep them apart, we have red coolant for the heating system and blue for the engine coolant system. To get the red coolant into the heated floors and get it onto pressure, I can just pump it in with a drill pump. The exhaust pipe gets some heat resistant paint and then we can check if it fires up. Sure sounds like it. And it's getting hot, according to my new little infrared camera. So are the pipes. And the exhaust. Now we can also test the heated floors. From inside the engine room it seems to be working. Inside the wheelhouse too. And in the saloon. That was a promising test, but we're not finished. The exhaust pipe can be insulated again. And the heating pipes have to be painted or they will get rusty in the long run. Of course, not everything is perfect the first time. When the Webasto is on, everything works great. But when the buffer tank is hot and the Webasto switches off, the floor heating pump was still pumping through the Webasto loop, instead of the buffer tank. So the floors didn't get any heat. To counter that, I installed a solenoid valve in the Webasto loop that only opens when the Webasto coolant pump switches on. After a couple of days, I noticed that almost all the threaded couplings started sweating. And this is the cause. This Loctite 55 thread sealant cord is really the easiest, most versatile and instant way of sealing a thread. For water, air, some oils and gas. But it turns out, not for glycol coolant. Glycol has such a low surface tension that it can seep through the microscopic gaps in thread sealant cord. So for that, I should have used this, Loctite 577, which just glues the threads shut. But it has a drying time and it's just a bit less user-friendly than Loctite 55. Anyways, it took me a day to take out all the threaded couplings, clean them and reinstall them with Loctite 577 and then we were leak-free. Should I have looked that up before? Yes. But I pressure tested the system with water and everything seemed fine. Now we can test if the engine coolant also heats up the buffer tank. At first we see that the return line becomes hot, which makes sense because just after startup the buffer tank is hotter than the engine coolant. After a while, when the generator is warmed up, we can see that the supply line has become hotter than the return line, so it's transferring its heat to the buffer tank. The coolant branch from the main engine still has to be tested and fine-tuned. But for now, we are ready for wintertime. If you have any questions or remarks, please let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.